Guard and horse show powerful respect to Old Guard veteran. The arena was still empty, except for a few early staff members checking fences, arranging chairs, and leading horses into the paddocks. The air smelled of fresh hay, soft earth, and the faint perfume of leather saddles. Everything was calm yet buzzing with a sense of anticipation. Today was special, not just any horse show, but a celebration of skill, dedication, and respect, and somewhere among the crowd would be a man who had seen more of life's battles than most. Captain James Harrington walked slowly along the edge of the arena, his steps deliberate and measured. Age had touched his face, giving him deep lines around his eyes and mouth, but his posture was strong, straight, like a soldier who had never truly forgotten how to stand at attention. He carried himself with a quiet dignity that made people notice him without him trying. His uniform had long been retired, but the medals he once earned were not forgotten by the town or by those who knew his story. Today he was simply an observer, yet there was an unspoken weight in the way he moved, a reminder that experience carries a certain power, even without words. As he made his way toward a small bench near the center of the arena, he paused to watch a young rider leading a chestnut horse through its paces. The boy was no more than 12, his face bright with excitement, yet tense with the pressure of wanting to do everything perfectly. Captain Harrington smiled faintly. He remembered a time when he had trained new recruits, teaching them not just how to follow orders, but how to act with discipline, respect, and awareness. The lessons he had learned in his years of service still mattered today, even in a place so different from a military camp. Around him, the arena slowly began to fill. Families, students, and horse enthusiasts streamed in, their laughter and chatter mingling with the soft nickering of horses. Stalls and tents were set up, colorful banners flapped gently in the breeze, and the smell of popcorn and fresh coffee added to the festive atmosphere. Yet through all the noise and excitement, Captain Harrington remained calm, observing every movement, every interaction, as if cataloging the world around him in careful detail. To him, this was not just a horse show. It was a stage where discipline, practice, and respect could be seen in every turn, every jump, and every precise movement. He remembered his own youth years ago when he first joined the Old Guard. Back then, he had been just a young man eager to prove himself, full of energy, but lacking understanding of the deeper values of service. The training had been strict, sometimes exhausting, but it had taught him lessons that no school or book could ever provide. He remembered early mornings that began before sunrise, drills that tested every muscle, and long nights spent reflecting on duty and honor. The memories brought a faint smile to his face. Life had changed him, shaped him into someone who understood that respect was earned not through words but through actions, and that every detail, no matter how small, mattered. A group of riders appeared near the far side of the arena, practicing jumps over wooden bars and small obstacles. Their horses pranced nervously at first, but with gentle guidance, they settled into a rhythm. Captain Harrington watched as the riders corrected their posture, adjusted their reins, and whispered soothing words to the animals. It reminded him of the countless times he had observed young soldiers learning to move with precision, learning that confidence came from preparation and respect for the task at hand. Each small success, each careful movement, was a step toward mastery, and he felt a quiet appreciation for the patience these young riders were showing. As more spectators arrived, a young girl caught his attention. She was trying to calm a skittish horse, her small hands trembling slightly as she held the reins. Captain Harrington felt a pang of empathy. He remembered the first time he had faced a challenge he thought was impossible. The fear, the uncertainty, the way every instinct seemed to shout at him to stop. Yet it was in those moments that courage was born, not the absence of fear, but the ability to continue despite it. He quietly observed her, noting how she adjusted her stance, softened her voice, and slowly earned the horse's trust. It was a small but powerful lesson in patience and determination, one that he knew would stay with her for the rest of her life. The veteran's attention then turned to the crowd. People of all ages were gathering, some familiar faces, others new to the event. Children ran between the rows of chairs, their laughter echoing through the arena, while parents and grandparents found spots near the fences, eager to witness every jump and spin. Among them, some had heard of Captain Harrington, recognizing the veteran from old photographs or local stories. They watched him discreetly, a mixture of curiosity and respect in their eyes. The presence of someone who had served the country so faithfully brought a sense of solemnity to the festive air. It was a quiet reminder that honor and sacrifice often stood beside joy and celebration. The announcer's voice began to carry across the arena, welcoming everyone to the horse show and sharing brief stories of the participants. Captain Harrington listened, nodding slightly at the achievements of the riders. It was easy to see the parallels between this event and his own experiences in the Old Guard. Discipline, dedication, and practice were universal values, whether in the military or in the arena. He understood that this day was not just about winning ribbons or trophies, but about learning, growing, and honoring the hard work that went into every effort. As the first riders prepared to take the arena, Captain Harrington settled onto the bench, his eyes following each movement carefully. The horses snorted and stamped, their muscles coiling with energy. The riders adjusted their helmets, checked their saddles, and took a deep breath. The veteran's mind wandered briefly to the days when he had overseen parades, ceremonies, and drills, ensuring that every step, every salute, and every movement reflected honor and respect. Watching these young riders now, he felt a familiar sense of pride, not for himself, but for the future, for the continuity of values that mattered so much to him. Throughout the arena, small moments unfolded that caught his attention. A boy helped another rider untangle a bridle. A girl steadied a horse for someone smaller and less confident. Each act of kindness, patience, or focus brought a quiet smile to Captain Harrington's face. It reminded him that honor was not only in grand gestures, medals, or formal recognition, but also in the simple, thoughtful acts that showed respect for others. These moments, small as they were, carried the weight of the lessons he had lived by all his life. By mid-morning, the arena was alive with movement and anticipation. Horses pranced, riders adjusted their posture, and the crowd buzzed with excitement. Captain Harrington remained a quiet observer, his presence unnoticed by most, yet deeply felt by those who had learned of his past. The veteran knew that this day was more than a show. It was a bridge between generations. Here, young riders could learn discipline, resilience, and the quiet power of respect, not from a classroom but from real experience, lived by those who had walked the path before them. As the first rider entered the arena, taking careful steps with her horse over the first small jump, Captain Harrington's gaze followed every motion. His mind traced patterns of movement, recalling similar exercises in his own youth, moments when precision and focus were everything. The soft thud of hooves on the ground, the gentle tug of reins, the whispered encouragements. It all felt familiar, comforting even, as if the values he had dedicated his life to were being carried forward in a new form. For the first time that day, a quiet thrill ran through him. He realized that this horse show, full of energy and hope, was not only a celebration of skill, but also a living testament to the lessons of a lifetime. The arena was now alive with movement. Horses trotted and pranced, their riders adjusting their posture with careful precision. Captain James Harrington sat quietly on his bench, watching every detail. He noticed the nervous excitement in the young riders, the gentle way they guided their horses, and the way each animal responded with trust and patience. To him, it was more than just a display of skill. It was a lesson in connection, discipline, and respect between humans and animals alike. A group of riders began their warm-up routine near the far end of the arena. They moved together, each horse in rhythm with its rider, practicing simple turns and steps. Captain Harrington leaned slightly forward, eyes narrowing with interest. He could see the small mistakes. One horse hesitated too long before a turn, another rider's back was slightly stiff, but he also noticed how quickly they corrected themselves. It reminded him of his own days in the Old Guard, watching new recruits struggle with the same kind of tension, and then gradually mastering the discipline that would shape them into capable, confident soldiers. The veteran's attention shifted to a young boy, no older than 10, leading a large black horse through a series of careful maneuvers. The boy's hands shook slightly as he held the reins, and the horse occasionally snorted, testing his control. Captain Harrington's mind wandered to his own youth, when he had faced challenges that seemed larger than life, and the courage it had taken to push through them. He understood that these small moments of struggle were crucial. Success was not measured in perfection, but in persistence, patience, and the ability to learn from mistakes. Around the arena, the atmosphere was electric. Families and friends cheered from the stands, clapping whenever a horse and rider performed well. The announcer's voice carried across the arena, providing details about the participants and the events. Captain Harrington listened quietly, smiling faintly at the enthusiasm of the young audience members. It was encouraging to see such support for the next generation. He knew that encouragement, combined with discipline, was one of the strongest foundations for growth. As the warm-up continued, a girl guiding a chestnut horse caught his eye. She struggled to maintain her composure as the horse became restless, pulling gently against the reins. Captain Harrington felt a surge of empathy. He remembered the first time he had faced a challenge that tested both patience and skill. At that moment, every instinct seemed to demand giving up, but it was persistence that had seen him through. He watched as she took a deep breath, adjusted her grip, and spoke softly to the horse. Slowly, the animal calmed, following her lead. It was a small victory, but one that reflected the same values Captain Harrington had lived by: patience, respect, and quiet determination. The veteran's thoughts wandered to the training grounds of his past. He remembered early mornings, when fog still clung to the fields, and recruits would stand at attention, waiting for the day's instructions. Every drill, every march, every command had been designed to teach more than just movement. It taught discipline, focus, and mutual respect. Watching these young riders now, he could see those same principles at work. The horse show was, in its own way, a classroom of life lessons. Every jump, every turn, every gesture carried meaning far beyond the arena. Nearby, a group of older riders began a more complex routine. Their horses moved in coordinated patterns, weaving through obstacles and performing synchronized turns. Captain Harrington's eyes followed every step. The precision and timing reminded him of ceremonial drills he had participated in, where every movement had to be exact, and where any mistake could disrupt the harmony of the entire formation. It was clear that the riders had trained hard, and he felt a quiet admiration for their dedication. Discipline, he thought, was always visible in action. It could not be hidden or faked. A sudden mishap caught his attention. One of the horses, startled by a loud noise from the crowd, jumped slightly and nearly knocked over a small barrier. The rider, a teenage girl, reacted quickly, regaining control with a combination of firmness and gentle guidance. Captain Harrington felt a surge of pride. This was the essence of training and character, not never facing challenges, but responding calmly and effectively when they occurred. He could almost hear the lessons he had taught so many years ago echoing in that moment. Stay calm, assess the situation, and act with purpose. The crowd responded with applause, and the young riders beamed with pride. Captain Harrington smiled faintly, pleased not just by their skill but by their ability to handle unexpected situations. He understood that life, much like the arena, would throw challenges in their path. Success was not about perfection, but about resilience, adaptability, and maintaining respect for oneself and others in the process. Watching them, he felt a deep sense of hope for the future. Throughout the morning, more riders took the arena. Some were confident and polished, others hesitant and nervous, yet all displayed effort and commitment. Captain Harrington's attention to detail never wavered. He noticed how riders adjusted their posture, how they communicated silently with their horses, and how small gestures, a soft touch, a guiding hand, a word of encouragement, made a profound difference. These were the moments that defined true skill and understanding, and he felt grateful to witness them. Between performances, Captain Harrington observed the spectators. Parents whispered encouragement to their children, friends cheered each other on, and even strangers clapped for good performances. He realized that respect was not limited to formal titles or ceremonies. It existed in every act of support, recognition, and shared enthusiasm. It was woven into the very fabric of the event, connecting everyone present, from the youngest rider to the oldest observer. For him, this understanding brought a sense of peace. The lessons of the old guard were alive here, carried forward in small but meaningful ways. A young rider approached him, hesitating slightly before speaking. "Sir," the boy said softly, "did you ride horses too?" Captain Harrington looked at him and nodded gently. "Yes," he replied, "many years ago. And I learned that patience and respect are the most important skills you can have, both with horses and with people." The boy nodded, eyes wide, clearly absorbing the words. It was a small interaction, but to Captain Harrington it was significant. Knowledge, values, and lessons were passed forward not just through instruction, but through simple, sincere communication. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the arena became warmer and the excitement grew. The riders now faced more challenging routines, combining jumps, turns, and synchronized movements. Captain Harrington observed with a mixture of analytical focus and quiet admiration. He could see who had practiced diligently and who was still learning. Yet he felt no judgment, only appreciation for effort and dedication. He understood that mastery was a journey, not a destination, and that encouragement and patience were as important as skill. During a brief break, Captain Harrington walked slowly along the edge of the arena, glancing at the horses in the paddocks. He ran a hand lightly over the mane of a calm bay horse, feeling the strength and gentleness beneath. Memories flooded back of long hours spent training recruits, preparing for ceremonies, and working alongside comrades. It was a reminder that respect extended to all living beings, and that the bond between humans and animals could teach lessons no book ever could. He paused, watching a young rider approach her horse, whispering softly as she adjusted the reins. In that simple act, he saw courage, patience, and connection, values that had shaped his life. The announcer's voice returned, calling for the next group of riders. Captain Harrington settled back onto his bench, eyes following each performance with careful attention. He noticed the subtle shifts in balance, the small corrections made in mid-step, and the trust between horse and rider. Each performance was unique, yet all reflected the same underlying principles of discipline, respect, and dedication. Watching this unfold, he felt a deep satisfaction. This was more than a horse show. It was a living lesson in values that had guided his life and could inspire the next generation. As the morning progressed, the arena became a place where effort, respect, and discipline shone as clearly as the polished hooves of the horses. Captain Harrington observed quietly, occasionally offering a nod or a smile to the riders as they passed. He felt a growing connection to the young performers, recognizing in them the same potential, courage, and determination he had seen in himself and his comrades years ago. The horse show was not only a test of skill, but a reflection of life's lessons, made visible in movement, focus, and care. By the time the final group of riders prepared for their routines, the arena was filled with energy, anticipation, and admiration. Captain Harrington's eyes followed each step, each jump, each graceful turn. He understood that these young riders were not just performing for ribbons or applause, they were learning about patience, trust, and respect. And he felt proud, knowing that the values he had dedicated his life to were alive and visible here, in the careful hands of the next generation. As the horse show moved past the morning routines, a gentle calm settled over the arena. The excitement of the first rounds had begun to blend with the anticipation of the more challenging performances ahead. Captain James Harrington remained seated on his bench, quietly observing, but there was a subtle change in the atmosphere. The energy of the crowd shifted, a hushed respect filled the air. Whispers ran through the audience, spreading like a quiet wind as people began to recognize the veteran among them. Some pointed discreetly, others leaned forward in their seats, curious about the man who carried the weight of years and service so gracefully. The announcer's voice grew clear and steady, capturing everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we are honored to have with us today a distinguished guest, Captain James Harrington, a proud member of the Old Guard whose service to our country has inspired many. Let us welcome him warmly." For a moment, the arena fell silent. The applause that followed was genuine and heartfelt. It was not just polite clapping, it was a recognition of dedication, courage, and sacrifice. Captain Harrington, ever humble, nodded slightly, acknowledging the appreciation without seeking attention. He had learned long ago that true respect was earned quietly, through action, not words or fanfare. Yet he felt a warmth in his chest, a mixture of pride and nostalgia as the crowd's acknowledgement reached him. A few of the young riders, overhearing the announcement, paused in their preparations. Their eyes widened in surprise and admiration. Some approached cautiously, unsure of how to address the veteran they had only heard stories about. One young girl holding the reins of a spirited gray horse stepped forward timidly. "Sir," she said softly, her voice almost trembling, could you watch us? Maybe give us advice?" Captain Harrington smiled gently, his eyes kind and encouraging. "Of course," he replied. "I'll watch and I'll share what I can. Remember, every small effort matters. Respect your horse, respect yourself, and everything else will follow." The girl nodded eagerly and returned to her horse, her confidence visibly growing. Captain Harrington's attention returned to the arena, where riders prepared for more complex routines. The young performers had clearly heard of his presence, and an air of seriousness settled over them. They moved with renewed focus, adjusting their posture, checking their reins, and taking deep breaths. The veteran's eyes followed every movement with meticulous care. To him, this was not about competition. It was about growth, discipline, and the quiet pursuit of excellence. A boy leading a chestnut horse stepped into the arena next. He was noticeably nervous, and the horse seemed to sense it, shifting its weight and pawing at the ground. Captain Harrington's mind went back to his own early days in the Old Guard. He remembered feeling nervous before his first inspection, his hands clammy, his heart pounding, yet finding the courage to stand tall and follow through. He watched the boy take a deep breath, straighten his back, and guide the horse forward with gentle commands. Slowly, the horse calmed, following the boy's lead. The crowd applauded, and Captain Harrington offered a small nod of approval. Moments like this, he knew, carried lessons far beyond the arena. As the morning continued, a young girl and her horse prepared for a synchronized routine with another pair. The coordination required was difficult, and even small errors could disrupt the entire performance. Captain Harrington observed quietly, noting how each rider adjusted their position, guided their horse with subtle cues, and maintained focus despite the audience's eyes. He was reminded of the teamwork he had learned in his military days. True success, whether on the battlefield or in the arena, required patience, respect, and understanding between partners, whether human or animal. During a short break, the veteran walked slowly among the riders, offering encouragement without overshadowing their efforts. "Your horse responds to your calm," he said to one nervous boy. "Remember that, calmness builds trust." He knelt briefly beside a smaller horse, running his hand gently along its neck. "Respect every creature," he whispered, as though sharing a secret. "It will give you more than skill, it will give you confidence." The riders listened intently, hanging on every word. To them, these were not just instructions. They were lessons from someone who had lived a life of discipline, courage, and service. The announcer returned to the microphone, calling for a special segment of the show, a ceremonial performance honoring veterans. Captain Harrington watched as the riders prepared. Flags were carefully placed, and horses were lined up in formation, reflecting a sense of order reminiscent of military drills. Young riders adjusted their posture, heels down, backs straight, reins firm but gentle. Captain Harrington's eyes softened as he observed the preparation. The ceremony was more than a performance. It was a symbol of respect, a bridge between generations, and a recognition of values that transcended time. As the routine began, the arena was filled with the rhythmic sound of hooves and the soft swish of reins. Riders guided their horses with precision, performing synchronized steps that reflected countless hours of practice. Captain Harrington's heart swelled with pride. He recognized the effort, discipline, and focus that mirrored the values he had spent a lifetime upholding. Each movement was deliberate, graceful, and filled with meaning. The young riders, though nervous, carried themselves with dignity, their performance an unspoken message of respect to the veteran who inspired them. During the ceremony, one of the riders paused momentarily, bowing her head toward Captain Harrington. The crowd's applause grew louder, and a few children waved shyly, showing their admiration. The veteran's eyes glistened slightly, though he kept his composure. He understood the power of small gestures, the way they could communicate honor and gratitude without words. For him, this recognition was not about personal pride. It was about witnessing the continuation of values that mattered most: discipline, respect, courage, and humility. After the ceremonial performance, the announcer invited Captain Harrington to speak briefly. He rose slowly, acknowledging the audience with a modest nod. His voice, steady and calm, carried across the arena. "I have watched many ceremonies, drills, and performances over the years," he said, "but what I see here today is remarkable. Not because of the skill alone, but because of the respect you show for your horses, for each other, and for the values that guide us all. Remember, it is not medals or applause that define honor. It is dedication, integrity, and the way we treat those around us. The audience listened in silence, captivated by the wisdom in his words. Young writers looked at him with admiration, their nervousness replaced with determination. Parents and spectators nodded, absorbing the message and reflecting on their own lives. For Captain Harrington, this was the true purpose of the event: to share lessons that could shape the next generation, to inspire, and to remind everyone that respect and discipline were timeless values. After his brief speech, Captain Harrington stepped back to the sidelines, watching as the writers prepared for the next segment. He noticed subtle changes in their demeanor. They moved with more confidence, spoke to their horses with calm authority, and worked together with a deeper sense of awareness. The veteran realized that his presence had made an impact, not through grand gestures, but through quiet encouragement and shared understanding. Each rider now carried a piece of his experience, blending it with their own efforts and learning. The morning continued with a mix of performances, each reflecting skill, discipline, and teamwork. Captain Harrington's eyes followed every rider closely. He noticed the smallest details: the way a horse's ears twitched in response to gentle guidance, the way a rider adjusted their seat to maintain balance, and the unspoken communication between human and animal. These small moments, he knew, were the essence of learning and growth. They reflected not just training, but respect for oneself, for others, and for the animals that shared the stage. By late morning, the arena had become a place of shared understanding. Spectators cheered, young riders performed with focus and care, and Captain Harrington observed with quiet pride. The horse show had evolved beyond a simple competition. It had become a living classroom, where lessons of patience, courage, and respect were practiced in real time. Every jump, every turn, and every gentle touch conveyed meaning, teaching values that could last a lifetime. As a young girl led her horse through a particularly challenging maneuver, Captain Harrington noticed her hesitation. The horse's movements were slightly off and her grip tightened nervously. He walked over quietly, kneeling beside the horse. "Remember," he whispered gently, "calmness, patience, and confidence. Your horse feels what you feel. Trust each other and the rest will follow." She nodded, taking a deep breath. Slowly, she guided the horse through the routine again, this time with fluidity and grace. The crowd erupted in applause, and Captain Harrington allowed himself a small smile. This was the moment that mattered: the transformation, the learning, and the quiet triumph of perseverance. The afternoon sun hung high over the arena, casting long shadows across the carefully groomed grounds. Captain James Harrington remained seated on his bench, quietly observing, though he could feel the building excitement in the crowd. The horse show had progressed from simple demonstrations to more challenging performances, and now, the moment everyone had been waiting for was approaching: the shared performance, the final display of skill and precision designed to honor the veterans. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation, yet underneath the energy was a profound sense of respect. Every person present seemed to understand that today was about more than ribbons or applause. It was about recognizing dedication, courage, and the values that guided both humans and horses alike. The riders gathered at the far end of the arena, checking their horses and adjusting their gear. Captain Harrington watched closely, his eyes noticing the smallest details: the gentle pressure of a rein, the careful placement of a foot in the stirrup, the subtle shift of weight as a horse adjusted to its rider. He thought back to his years in the old guard, where every small movement, every gesture mattered in the larger scheme. Discipline, precision, and attention to detail were not just lessons. They were habits that shaped character, instilled confidence, and earned respect. Seeing the young riders now, he felt a quiet satisfaction. The same values he had lived by were being honored and reflected in this performance. The announcer's voice rose across the arena, capturing the attention of the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, we ask for your attention as our young riders present a special performance dedicated to our veterans, and especially to Captain James Harrington, whose service and dedication have inspired us all." The crowd responded with applause, some standing there, faces serious yet warm with admiration. Captain Harrington remained seated, humbly acknowledging the recognition. He had spent decades serving quietly and faithfully, never seeking recognition, yet this moment filled him with a quiet pride. Not for himself, but for the young riders who had taken the time to honor the past while showing skill, patience, and respect. The first riders stepped into the arena, leading their horses with careful confidence. Their movements were synchronized, practiced over countless hours of training. Captain Harrington's eyes followed every motion, his experience allowing him to notice the subtle corrections made mid-step, the silent communication between rider and horse, and the harmony that had been achieved through patient effort. There was an almost ceremonial quality to the routine, reminiscent of military drills where each action carried meaning and purpose. For a moment, the veteran was transported back in time, remembering long parades and disciplined formations, the pride in perfect execution, and the sense of unity that came from shared purpose. As the performance progressed, the young riders executed a series of coordinated turns and jumps. The horses moved gracefully, yet with power and energy that demanded respect. Captain Harrington's attention sharpened, noting not just the skill of the riders, but the trust between human and animal. One young boy guided a spirited brown horse over a particularly challenging jump. For a brief moment, the horse hesitated, sensing the difficulty, but the boy's calm voice and steady hands reassured it. They cleared the obstacle together, perfectly in sync. The crowd erupted in applause, and Captain Harrington allowed himself a small nod of approval. This was not just a display of talent, it was a testament to patience, confidence, and respect, the very values he had spent a lifetime upholding. Nearby, a young girl and her white horse performed a delicate, synchronized routine with another pair. The coordination required was immense. Each step, each movement had to align precisely, or the routine would lose its flow. Captain Harrington watched, impressed by the careful communication between riders, the subtle cues shared with their horses, and the mutual trust that had been built through hours of practice. The performance mirrored lessons he had learned in his own life. That success was not about individual effort alone, but about cooperation, mutual respect, and shared understanding. Every gesture in the arena carried meaning far beyond the performance itself. As the routine continued, the veteran noticed something remarkable. The riders were not merely executing practiced movements. They were performing with intention, with heart, and with an awareness of the significance of this moment. They were honoring the veterans, but they were also honoring themselves, learning through action what it meant to combine skill with respect. Captain Harrington felt a deep sense of pride and hope. The values he had cherished were alive in these young riders, visible not just in their performances, but in their demeanor, their focus, and their interactions with the horses. The audience, too, was caught up in the moment. Families, friends, and spectators who had come to watch a horse show were now witnessing a living tribute. Applause rose and fell with the rhythm of the performance, but there was also a quiet reverence in the air. People understood that what they were seeing was more than entertainment. It was a message, a lesson in discipline, respect, and courage passed from one generation to another. Captain Harrington's presence had amplified this sense of meaning, creating a bridge between past and present, between experience and potential. A particularly tense moment arrived when a large gray horse approached a difficult obstacle. The rider, a teenage girl, felt the pressure but took a deep breath, recalling the words she had heard from the veteran earlier: calmness, patience, and confidence. She adjusted her posture, guided the horse with gentle hands, and whispered reassuring words. The horse responded, leaping over the obstacle with grace and strength. The crowd erupted in applause, and Captain Harrington's eyes glistened slightly. It was a reminder that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act with composure despite it. As the final part of the performance approached, the riders formed a line, their horses moving in perfect synchrony. Flags were raised, representing the country, the town, and the values the veterans had defended. Captain Harrington felt a deep emotion swell within him. This was more than a performance. It was a celebration of dedication, a living tribute to those who had served, and a demonstration of the power of discipline, respect, and perseverance. The young riders moved with confidence and humility, executing each movement with precision while keeping their focus on the meaning behind their actions. At the climax of the performance, the riders guided their horses in a ceremonial salute, turning their heads and lifting their reins in perfect harmony. Captain Harrington rose slowly, moved by the gesture. The applause from the audience was thunderous, yet he remained composed, allowing the recognition to pass without arrogance. This moment, he knew, was not about him. It was about the values that had been passed on, the lessons that would remain with the young riders, and the connection between generations. He could see in their eyes the understanding, the pride, and the respect that could not be taught in words alone. After the performance, the riders led their horses back to the paddocks, carefully guiding them as if sharing a silent conversation of gratitude and trust. Captain Harrington approached, offering quiet words of praise. "You performed beautifully," he said, his voice calm but warm. "Not just because of your skill, but because of the respect and care you showed for your horses, for each other, and for the values that matter most." The riders listened intently, their faces bright with pride and understanding. They realized that true success was measured not in applause or trophies, but in effort, respect, and growth. Throughout the afternoon, Captain Harrington remained among the riders, observing, offering encouragement, and quietly teaching through example. He noticed the subtle transformations that had taken place, the way nervousness had been replaced by confidence, how hesitation had given way to trust, and how the riders had internalized the lessons of patience, discipline, and respect. These changes were small yet profound, and they reminded him that the work of passing on values was never complete. It required time, attention, and care, but the results were lasting and meaningful. By the time the sun began its slow descent, casting golden light over the arena, the shared performance had left an indelible mark. The crowd lingered, applauding, discussing, and reflecting on what they had witnessed. Captain Harrington remained calm, observing quietly, yet he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had seen the values he had cherished in his own life reflected in a new generation, alive and vibrant, visible in every gesture, every movement, and every act of care. This was the true victory, the lasting impact of dedication and respect, and the reason he had returned to the arena today. As the audience began to disperse and the riders led their horses back to the stables, Captain Harrington took a moment to walk among the animals. He ran a hand gently along the neck of a horse, feeling the strength and gentleness beneath. He reflected on the day's events, on the performances, on the lessons shared, and on the connections forged between human and animal, veteran and youth. It was a day that honored the past, celebrated the present, and inspired the future, a day where skill, discipline, and respect had come together in a living, unforgettable way. As the sun began its slow descent, casting a warm, golden glow over the arena, the excitement of the day started to settle into a peaceful calm. The horse show was drawing to a close, but the energy remained vibrant. Captain James Harrington remained seated on his bench, quietly observing, his mind reflecting on the events of the day. Every performance, every jump, and every carefully guided step had been more than a display of skill. It had been a living lesson in discipline, patience, respect, and courage. He realized that this day had not only honored him as a veteran, but had also shown him the lasting impact of the values he had lived by for so many years. The young riders, who had earlier seemed nervous and uncertain, were now walking with quiet confidence. Their eyes sparkled with pride, and their movements carried a new sense of assurance. They had not only performed for the audience, but had also learned important lessons about trust, teamwork, and perseverance. Captain Harrington watched them carefully, noting how each child interacted with their horse with gentle authority, guiding it with respect rather than force. It reminded him of the principle he had always believed in. Leadership was not about power or command, but about guidance, patience, and care. As the crowd began to stand and prepare to leave, whispers ran through the spectators, a mixture of admiration and curiosity. Many had watched the entire day, witnessing not just the skill of the riders, but also the quiet presence of the veteran who had inspired them all. Some approached Captain Harrington with warm smiles, offering words of gratitude and respect. "Thank you for your service," one man said, shaking his hand firmly. "We are honored to have you here." The veteran nodded humbly, replying simply, "It is my privilege to be among those who honor effort, discipline, and respect." Meanwhile, a few of the young riders approached him more cautiously, their faces a mixture of awe and curiosity. A girl holding a small, chestnut horse spoke first. "Sir," she said softly, "thank you for teaching us today." "We learned so much." Captain Harrington smiled warmly, placing a gentle hand on the horse's neck. "You did the learning yourself," he said. "I only guided you." Remember, every action matters, every choice counts, and every moment of care builds respect. The children nodded, understanding the quiet power in his words. As the horses were led back to the stables, Captain Harrington walked slowly along the arena, observing the bond between rider and animal. He paused occasionally, gently patting a horse or whispering a word of encouragement. Each interaction reminded him of the countless hours he had spent mentoring young soldiers in his past. The principles were the same: patience, respect, and discipline created trust, confidence, and growth. He realized that these lessons were timeless and universal, whether in the military or in a horse show. The announcer returned to the microphone, thanking the audience for attending and acknowledging the efforts of all participants. Special mention was given to Captain Harrington, whose presence had brought meaning and depth to the day's events. The applause that followed was heartfelt and sustained, not just for the performances, but for the values they had represented. Captain Harrington stood quietly, a modest smile on his face, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. The recognition was not for him personally, he knew, but for the legacy of dedication, courage, and honor that he had been able to share with the next generation. As the crowd began to disperse, a few of the riders lingered, reluctant to end the day. One young boy, still holding the reins of his horse, looked up at Captain Harrington and asked, "Will we see you again at the next show?" The veteran's eyes softened. "Perhaps," he said. "But even if I am not here, remember the lessons of today. Trust, patience, respect, and courage are always with you wherever you go." The boy nodded, his expression serious but determined, as if he had understood something far beyond the arena. Captain Harrington walked slowly toward the edge of the arena, taking one last look at the open field bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. He reflected on the day's events, the skill of the riders, the grace of the horses, the excitement and respect of the audience. He realized that the horse show had become more than a competition. It had become a bridge between generations. The young riders had shown determination, courage, and discipline, while the audience had shown respect and appreciation. And in the middle of it all, the veteran had found a quiet satisfaction in knowing that his own experiences had helped inspire and guide them. Nearby, a group of riders were helping each other untack the horses, laughing and sharing stories of their performances. Captain Harrington observed with a quiet smile. The camaraderie and teamwork reminded him of his days in the old guard, where shared effort and mutual respect created bonds that lasted a lifetime. He realized that these young riders were forming the same kind of bonds, learning lessons that would extend far beyond the arena. Every careful step, every gentle touch, every moment of encouragement was part of a larger story of growth, trust, and respect. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the field, Captain Harrington walked among the horses one last time. He paused beside a young girl who had been struggling earlier in the day. "You did well today," he said softly. "Not because of the performance, but because of the care and patience you showed. That is what will guide you in the future." She smiled shyly, clearly understanding the importance of his words. It was a quiet, intimate moment, one that carried more meaning than any applause or ribbon ever could. Captain Harrington then turned to look at the arena, now empty except for a few remaining staff members packing up equipment. The chairs were folded, the flags were being taken down, and the horses were returning to their stables. Yet the arena still felt alive with the memory of the day, the performances, the learning, the laughter, and the respect. He realized that what mattered most was not the show itself, but the values it had represented and the lessons it had taught. The young riders had not only demonstrated skill, but also courage, patience, and respect, lessons that would stay with them for a lifetime. As he walked toward the exit, several audience members approached him once more, offering heartfelt thanks. Parents, grandparents, and children alike expressed their appreciation for his presence, his guidance, and the inspiration he had provided. Captain Harrington accepted their gratitude with humility, reminding them quietly that it was the riders who had worked hard, shown dedication, and earned the respect they received. Yet he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The day had been a success not because of him, but because of the shared effort, mutual respect, and meaningful lessons that had taken place in the arena. Outside the arena, the air was cool and calm, carrying the faint scent of hay and earth. Captain Harrington paused for a moment, looking back at the field one last time. He thought about the generations he had guided, the lessons he had shared, and the values that had been honored today. He realized that his service, long years of discipline, and dedication had created ripples that extended far beyond his own life. The young writers had learned, the audience had witnessed, and the principles of patience, respect, and courage had been passed forward. It was a quiet but powerful legacy, one that would continue long after the horse show ended. As he walked away, a gentle breeze ruffled his hair, and he felt a sense of contentment. He knew that the day had been more than just a horse show. It had been a celebration of values, a bridge between generations, and a reminder that respect, courage, and discipline were timeless. Captain Harrington understood that while the performances had ended, the lessons and inspiration would continue to resonate. The young riders would carry these experiences with them. The audience would remember the meaning behind the show, and he himself would leave knowing that his life of service had contributed to something lasting, meaningful, and deeply human. The veteran paused at the edge of the field, taking one final look at the arena as the last light of the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and pink. He felt a profound sense of fulfillment. This day, filled with horses, young riders, and shared respect, had reminded him of the power of patience, discipline, and guidance. It had shown him that true honor was not measured in accolades or recognition, but in the quiet ways we teach, inspire, and support others. And as Captain Harrington walked away, he knew that the values he had lived by all his life had found a new home in the hearts of the next generation.